Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Occult Perspectives. Your host, Tyler Smith, here. If you are new to my channel, you don't know who I am. On this channel, I mostly cover occult research, subjects such as Freemasonry, ceremonial magic, the Golden Dawn, the Tree of Life, and Kabbalah in general. And we also cover the Klipothic tree on this channel as well. I've kind of gone back and forth on a lot of subjects, just trying to cover a wide array of things. But in today's video, we're going to get back into Masonry a little bit. We are going to start talking about the Scottish Rite. What is the Scottish Rite? A brief history, how the structure of the degrees are set up, and then we'll start getting into a little bit of the symbolism of the fourth degree, which is called the Secret Master. So I recommend every Freemason, when they become initiated, if you don't know what Freemasonry is, you probably want to do some research on your own, maybe before you watch this video if you're unfamiliar with Freemasonry. There is a video I did very early on my YouTube channel. I should probably just go ahead and make a Freemason playlist. But it was called Freemasonry and the Definition of Ceremonial Magic. It was like my third video ever on this channel, and I give a pretty good introduction to what Freemasonry is in that video. There are also numerous resources available. One of the best research channels for Freemasonry that I've come across, I think it's called Michigan Museum and Library. That's a really good YouTube channel. And there are a few others. Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction has their own YouTube channel. So go and try to find like a more official Masonic research channel, one that you can actually tell that they either are Freemasons or they actually know what they're talking about when it comes to Freemasonry, because there's a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about out there, and they only know one side of it. They don't understand all the angles, components, and aspects of Freemasonry. And as a Mason myself, that's why I feel that people could really get some value from this channel, because I have a lot of personal experience myself. And I don't just view Masonry from the basic fraternal aspect. For a lot of men, Freemasonry is just a place where they gather together, for fraternity and brotherhood and fellowship and bonding. And they also do good charity works for the community. So it's all about self-improvement. It's all about making a good man better, making him better than he would have been if he were not a Mason. So all of these degrees, it's not about, people think it's about controlling the world or controlling others, and that's just a misconception. They're all about self-improvement. How can we be better to ourselves, and how can we be better to others, and how can we help create a better world? So with that being said, when you are initiated into Freemasonry, the Blue Lodge is the first 3 degrees. Those are the most important degrees of Freemasonry. And then once you become a Master Mason, once you've become an Entered Apprentice, you've gone through the degree of Fellowcraft, and you've gone through the degree of Master Mason, then you can join either Scottish Rite or York Rite. And those are 2 separate independent bodies of Freemasonry, but it's all a part of Freemasonry. And the Scottish Rite is split into 2 jurisdictions. There's a northern jurisdiction and there's a southern jurisdiction. And I believe they may actually be merging together. It may all be one thing at some point. I think that's something that's in the works. Don't quote me on that, though, for sure. But when you go through your degrees, and after you've completed the Master Mason degree, then you can take your Bible home. You may have a family member who has a Masonic Bible like this. This is a family heirloom Bible. It's really beautiful. It's really nice. It's gold pages. And you could probably buy one online too. I don't think they would cost that much. But anyway, there's really nice information before you even get into it's the King James Version of the Bible that's in this. And there's some introductory stuff talking about the different degrees of Freemasonry. And of course, it talks about Blue Lodge Masonry. And then it talks about the degrees of York Rite. And then it also covers the Scottish Rite Masonry and talks about a little bit about Eastern Star as well, which is for female relatives of Masons, sisters, nieces, wives, grandmas, aunts, you name it. And actually, in Ohio, there are not women Freemasons. That's not a thing. But in different parts of the world and earlier in history, like more the 1700s and 1800s, there were occasionally female women in female lodges. So that's like a really interesting topic that I'm not going to get into in this video, but I just wanted to let you know that that was a thing, which to me is super intriguing. So anyway, it gives a brief history of the Scottish Rite here, which I'm just gonna read this passage real quick. And as you know, there's a lot of, if you like history, Freemasonry is great for that. There's so much rich history and lore. What I'm interested in and what I'm talk about in this YouTube channel, I talk about magic and things like that. And it really helps to, if you go through the degrees of Freemasonry, it's all going to make a lot more sense to you if you have some background or some knowledge of the occult, which, remember, the occult simply means that which is hidden. And if you've studied different forms of magic, whether that be ceremonial magic of, like the Golden Dawn type, any other variants of high magic, low magic, even Wiccas, they have ceremonies which are very similar to Freemasonic ceremonies in a lot of different ways. You'll find that a lot of these different secret societies and groups and lodges of different orders and different belief systems, different spiritual traditions, all have very similar, there's a lot of similarities. It's because they all come from more ancient sources. If we're going back in time, you've got Lemuria, and then you've got Atlantis, and then you have ancient Sumeria, and then you have ancient Egypt. So moving all throughout time, these teachings have been taught in a different way, and it's changed its format, so to speak, over time. So Freemasonry is like the more modern, like, adaptation or format of these ancient teachings, fitted and molded to fit more modern society, in a way. So let's go ahead and read this. Let's jump right into it. Ancient and accepted Scottish Rite Masonry. This branch of Freemasonry is the most popular and most widely diffused of all the rites of the order, above and supplementary to Blue Lodge Masonry. And one more thing I want to mention before I get into this. Yes, you can take further degrees after the Master Mason degree. Altogether there are 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, and that's not if you're including, the Editor Apprentice Fellowcraft and Master Mason degree of Blue Lodge. So altogether, that would be 30 degrees if you're not counting those. But you've got the York Rite, which ends in Knights Templar. It doesn't matter whether you become a 33rd. That's an honorary degree, by the way. We can get more into that in a different video if you want. That is not a degree that you can petition for. That is one that they have to come to you, and they know that you've put a lot of service into Scottish Rite or humanity as a whole. And then they come and kind of tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, would you like to be a 33rd? So it takes a lot of work, hard work, and dedication to get to that point. And that's something that they come to you for. You don't go out like seeking that. But all that aside, what I wanted to say was, after you've received the Master Mason degree, everyone's equal in the fraternity as Master Masons, no matter what higher, quote, rank or degrees you have. There's no higher honor, so we're all equals in the fraternity as Master Masons. That's an important thing to remember as well. And, I'm a part of the Scottish Rite myself. I have not seen all of the modern versions of all the degrees, but I have seen probably about half of the degrees, because nowadays they will only do 3 or 4 degrees at a time because they take up a lot of time to do that. It's like a half day venture. It takes 4 or 5 hours to put on just a few of these degrees. So you don't get all the degrees at one time, and you also don't work through them linear like you do in York Rite or in Blue Lodge. It's one and then the next and then the next. That's not the case with Scottish Rite today. So they might say they'll put on degrees 4, 7, 12, and 32. It might just be those degrees for the whole day, and those are the ones you will receive. But as soon as you've seen that degree, you get the credit for being that degree of Freemason. feel like there was going to be one more thing I mentioned. Oh yeah, so no matter how high your honor is, you're all equal as Master Masons. And the Master Mason degree, even though I've seen a lot of these degrees, and I've done a lot of study in Masonry, to me, the Master Mason is still pretty much the most impressive overall, as far as the symbolism and the presentation of how the brothers, put together the degree. It's really superb. Now, the Scottish Rite is really cool because it usually takes place in somewhere where there's like a theater stage. So you're actually watching, the degrees take place instead of actually individually going through it. You're watching it take place. You're more of a spectator. And that can be really, really, with lights and sound and all of the things that come with theater, it's very impressive. But overall, I think the Master Mason degree is my favorite as a whole degree, even though I've seen, the 32nd and many other of the Scottish Rite degrees and researched a lot of degrees. That one seems to be the most important as far as symbolism and what's been written about it, the lore. Manly P. Hall, that's a Freemason that I highly recommend you research. And Albert Pike, I have done many morals and dog videos on this YouTube channel and would love to do more in the future. So that if that's something that you want me to cover more, please let me know. So finally, let's go ahead and get to it. Let's read about Scottish Rite Freemasonry. This branch of Freemasonry is the most popular and most widely diffused of all the rites of the order above and supplementary to Blue Lodge Masonry. Similar to the requirements for membership to Royal Arch Masonry, all applicants must be Master Masons in good standing and with proved proficiency in the work of the Blue Lodge in all 3 degrees. So essential is this requirement that the first degree in the Scottish Rite is numbered 4, in succession to the 3rd degree in Blue Lodge Masonry. Scottish Rite Masonry, that was another thing I wanted to say, real quick, is there's a lot of just technical history that's involved with the fraternity, like how lodges were formed, who formed them, who were their grand masters, what happened to what lodges. While all that stuff is very, interesting, it's, me, I'm all about the esoteric lore, like what is the symbolism of the degree. So that, to me, is really the more important part of the Freemason degrees. That's where the real treasure lies, is the lore, the rich lore of the symbolism of the degrees, the esoteric portion of it, if you will. Scottish Rite Masonry was established not earlier than 1801. Its formation began nearly 50 years earlier, but it was nearly a half-century afterwards before these formative activities were completed. The history of the organization may be briefly set forth as follows. In 1758, a body was organized at Paris called the Council of Emperors of East and West. This council prepared a rite called the Rite of Perfection, which consisted of 25 degrees, the highest being the Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. In 1761, the council granted a patent or deputation to Stephen Morin, if I'm pronouncing that right, Stephen Morin, Morin, authorizing him to propagate the rite in the Western continent. Morin soon afterwards arrived in the city of St. Domingo, where he commenced the dissemination of the rite and appointed a number of inspectors, both for the West Indies and the United States. Among others, Morin conferred the degrees on M. Hayes with the power of appointing others. Hayes accordingly appointed Isaac DaCosta, Deputy Inspector General for South Carolina, who in 1783 introduced the rite into that state by the establishment of a Grand Lodge of Perfection in Charleston. Other inspectors were subsequently appointed, and in 1801, a Supreme Council was opened in Charleston by John Mitchell and Frederick Dalcho, Dalcho. Up to that time, 25 degrees of the Rite of Perfection were alone recognized, but immediately after the organization of the Supreme Council, there arose a new rite, made by the adoption of 8 additional degrees known as Continental High degrees, thus making the 3rd and not the 25th degree the summit of the rite. Okay, so you have, and that was just a really brief history. If you want to know more about the history, it's going to be a lot like what I just read, but you can find YouTube videos on that. I know that they're out there, and they're not always that long. There's some pretty brief, shorter videos. I've been trying to stay hydrated. It's always good to drink water. Water is the key. That flow, yin and yang energy, the feminine energy. So to talk about the structure of these degrees, you have the Blue Lodge, of course, which is the first 3 degrees. Then you have the Lodge of Perfection, which is actually degrees 4 through 14. And these are 4 separate bodies within Scottish Rite Masonry. So there's 4 different sections. The Lodge of Perfection, which is the ones I just said, 4 through 14. Council of Princes of Jerusalem, which is degrees 15 and 16. The Chapter of Rose Croix, which is degrees 17 and 18. And those degrees have a lot of Christian symbolism in them. A lot of people think that Freemasons are opposed to like Jesus and Christianity. This is not the case at all. We accept members from all different religions, and the Bible, the symbolism of the Bible and stories from the Bible, and even Jesus himself. Often in the earlier versions of the higher degrees, Jesus is mentioned, oftentimes in a positive light. All of these things are about really making man better. So it's like a lot of the lessons you kind of almost learned in church, but with more understanding of the Bible. You're taught more of the symbolism and the understanding of what's the true meaning of all of these things. So Christianity, there's certain degrees in Scottish Rite which are based more around Christianity, and York Rite as a whole is more Christian in its nature, yet we accept men of all faiths into the fraternity. It's a very universal thing, and we take characteristics from different religions and use them in the degrees. It's all based around the allegory of King Solomon's Temple. All Masonic degrees relate or tie back to King Solomon's Temple in some way, fashion, or form. So the Chapter of the Rose Croix was actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This actually has a few different. I was thinking there were 4 different sections of Scottish Rite Masonry, but this lists 5 actually. But anyway, I'll continue. The Chapter of Rose Croix, as I just mentioned, is degrees 17 and 18. The Council of Kadash is degrees 19 through 30. And then the Consistory of the Sublime Princes of the Royal Secret. Consistory of Sublime Princes of the Royal Secret is degrees 31 and 32. And then you have the Supreme Council, which is the 33rd degree. So the splitting of that might be a little bit different nowadays. This Bible was probably written, I can tell this was written a long time ago. I don't know that they'd have any, previous copyrights, 1951 and 1954. So this is when this originally came out. So with the degrees broken down in that fashion, I was going to read from, if you can get your hand on Albert Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, you can find a lot of Masonic information in there. I mean, a lot that almost like most Masons don't even know, because most Masons haven't even read through that book. I mean, I've never read through all of Albert Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, but if you want to learn more about Freemasonry, that's like one of the top 3 books I'd recommend, learning about it. And there's a section for every degree. He has like a little section in it, kind of like this Bible does, that explains a little bit about each degree. So I think what I'm going to do today is, I was going to read from that, but this laptop over here is being a little finicky. So I'm just going to go ahead and read the description of the 32nd degree from this book. And that way you get a slight idea of what it's about. And then for the rest of the video, we are going to talk about some of the story aspects and symbolism of the 4th degree. Another thing to take into account as well with these degrees is they are not always the same. There are various forms of the degrees. Most of them are about the same, and then they make small changes over time, depending on which country the degree is given in, what what time frame, what year it was. A lot of the more modern degrees are more like kind of simplified and watered down, and they tie more around more modern events. So it's kind of adapted to more modern society. But the older versions of the degrees, like the 1700s versions, I'm sorry, the 1800s versions, um, they were more, I would say, what is the word? Like medieval in their aspect. It's more like knights and knighthood. And while that theme is still very prevalent in today's degrees, it was more so back then. So I actually like and I study the earlier versions of the degrees. The newer versions, they're nice as well, but I don't think they're as rich and complete in their symbolism as the older degrees. The older degrees is really where the gold lies. That's, to me, it's just, it makes more sense. It's more, I don't know. It's just, they have an older, even more biblical almost feel to them. Whereas, like I said, a lot of the newer degrees, like the fourth degree, for instance, used to be a really rich degree of symbolism, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. That's what the rest of this video will be about after I read this 32nd degree section. But the newer version of the degree, I'm not going to, there are certain things that, I'm not going to speak about. And there's reasons for that, because if we just told everybody everything there is about Freemasonry, what would be the point of joining? And you can know everything there is to know about Freemasonry. You can do all the Freemasonic research there is to do, but until you join and until you become a part of Lodge and actually go through it, you won't really completely understand it. It's not going to completely make sense for you. And it's like everything else in life, it has to actually be experienced. It's all just theoretical and pretty much just theoretical, and you might understand the concepts, but until you actually go through it and walk in those shoes, it's going to be a hard thing for you to understand, especially as an outsider, if you just try to go and read all the information. But there is a lot of information out there that will make sense to you. So if you are a male of at least 19 years of age, at least in the state of Ohio, that's the age, you might want to think about joining Freemasonry. That's something you might want to do. So let me go ahead and read this little section about the 32nd. The 32nd degree is called the Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. And honestly, I think this degree has connections with Raziel, the Archangel Raziel, because he's considered the prince of the second heaven, which is Hokmah, and he's also the prince. So he's often considered a prince or called a prince, and he's also the angel of he's called the secret of God, or the keeper of the secrets of God. So he is a prince angel which bears divine secrets. And that is very much, so the case with this degree, the 32nd degree, Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret degree. And also, when you add up the 10 paths the 10 spheres on the Tree of Life with the 22 paths, which are each represented by a major arcana card in the tarot, you get the number 32. So that's really cool as well. So connections with Archangel Raziel as being the prince or the keeper of secrets, and he's also the archangel of the second heaven, Hokmah, the divine masculine, the top of the white pillar, which in Freemasonry is called Yakin, or sometimes just Jakin. This degree was originally the 25th of the 25 degrees of the Lodge of Perfection, and when 8 additional degrees were added, forming Scottish Rite Masonry, this degree was transferred to the place of the 32nd degree. The ritual and certain historical data connected with the degree clearly indicate its association with other degrees of the higher orders which expound and amplify the ancient mysteries of Freemasonry. Through the centuries of the past, Freemasonry has drawn from the symbolisms and mysteries of ancient cults, even as the writers of the Hebraic scriptures drew from every available source for an understanding of the revelations of God and for the composition of the Hebrew system of religion. With the unveiling of great spiritual truths by the Hebrew writers and the reflection of divine light upon the mysteries of many ancient religions through these revelations, Masonry became the depository of divine truth in its symbols, traditions, legends, and mysteries, and has preserved truth through all the centuries of the past. In the ritual and teachings of this degree, advanced light and progress in the search for truth are supplied to the serious student of Masonry, and by the revelations of truth through many agencies of past history. Bodies of the 32nd degree are called consistories under special conditions. A particular body may be designated a grand consistory. The clothing of a sublime prince consists of an apron, a collar, and a jewel. The apron is white, edged with white, edged with black. On the flap are embroidered 6 flags, 3 on each side of the staves in saltier. Saltier. I am not familiar with that word. The colors of the flags are blue, red, and yellow. On the center of the flap over these is a Teutonic cross, surmounted by an all-seeing eye, and on the cross, a double-headed eagle not crowned. We talked about the symbolism of the double-headed eagle in both its aspects. There is a positive and a negative polarity to that symbol. So this eagle is not crowned, okay, in the 32nd degree. And then the 33rd, the eagle is crowned, I believe is what it is. On the body of the apron is the tracing board of the degree. The most important symbolism of the degree is the tracing board, which is technically called the camp. This is a symbol of deep import, and in its true interpretation is found the royal secret, from which the degree derives its name. This camp constitutes an essential part of the furniture of a consistory during an initiation, but its explanations are altogether esoteric. The motto of the degree is, "My hope is in God," given in Latin. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Nope, I'm not going to try, but it means my hope is in God. Okay, so let's get into the 4th degree. So the 4th degree is the first degree after the Master Mason degree if you're going towards Scottish Rite. Now, if you go towards York Rite Masonry, it would be Mark Master Mason degree. But if you're going into Scottish Rite, the 4th degree in this branch, and you can do both. I forgot to mention that as well. Yes, you can join both Scottish and York Rite, and I've been asked to join York Rite so many times, but I'm already so busy as it is. If I had, I'm not a person who really has a lot of free time because I do set aside time for myself, but I've always been a person who's involved. I'm always learning. I've been really involved in my community and involved with music, and I've traveled a lot, so I've had a really rich life experience, and that's something to be really, really grateful for. And, I feel really humbled to have been able to experience life in this way, in this fashion. So let's get into the little description in this. I'm still reading from the Bible, by the way, the beginning of the Bible that talks about the degrees. So the secret master degree. This degree refers to those circumstances which occurred at the temple when Solomon repaired to the building for the purpose of supplying the loss of its illustrious brother by the appointment of 7 experts. And the loss of the illustrious brother, of course, was Hiram Abiff. If you know the story of the 3rd degree, he is killed in the 3rd degree. So King Solomon hires 7 experts, among whom were to be divided the labors which previously had been entrusted to the one gigantic mind of Hiram Abiff. The lecture elaborately explains the mystic meaning of the most sacred articles placed in the sanctum sanctorum, or Holy of Holies. There are 2 presiding officers, a master styled, I don't know how to pronounce this word, puissant? 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 I don't know. Representing King Solomon, and an inspector representing Adoniram. This is a biblical character too. I'm pretty sure he's in the Bible. Who had the inspection of the workmen in the forest of Lebanon, and it's purported to have been the first secret master. Adoniram. I'm gonna assume that's how you say it. Solomon is seated in the east, clothed in mourning robes lined with ermine, holding a scepter in his hand and decorated with a blue sash from the right shoulder to the left hip, from which is suspended a triangle of gold. On a triangular altar before him is deposited a wreath of laurel and olive leaves. Adoniram, called Venerable Inspector, is seated in the west, but without any implements of office. In commemoration of the fact that the works were suspended at the time of the institution of this degree, he is decorated with a triangular white collar bordered with black, from which is suspended an ivory key, with the letter Z engraved thereon. Such is the collar and jewel of the degree, and the brethren are so clothed. The apron is white, bordered with black, and with black strings, with an open eye embroidered in gold on a blue flap. In the middle of the apron are 2 branches of laurel and olive crossing each other. Secrecy, obedience, and fidelity are distinctive virtues taught by this degree. Because it's called the Secret Master degree. So, a lot of what I just explained, the reason I didn't know how to pronounce that one guy's name, like I said, the 4th degree today is much different than it was back then. The 4th degree back then is much more interesting, in my opinion. And if you want to really get your hands on, if you really want to do some research into the degrees of Scottish Rite, this is a really good book. This is called the Franken manuscript, the 1783 manuscript. So this is like a really early, Scottish Rite document. And this has degrees 4 through 25 in it. Most of the degree work is actually in this book for those degrees. So if you actually want to buy this, you can actually buy this on the website of the Scottish Rite Northern Jurisdiction. They sell these books. So I've only read a little bit of that book. That's a huge book, and I've only just scratched the surface on that one. But I was taking notes from that book about the 4th degree, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that in this video. And this is kind of an introduction just to Scottish Rite Freemasonry in general. So, also, sorry, I have a nose itch. All that I was just telling you about how the officers are decorated. All of these fancy, he is decorated with a triangular white collar bordered with black, from which is suspended an ivory key. All of this type of stuff is not so much the case in today. We don't have a separate apron and different jewel for every single Scottish Rite degree. That was more something they did back then, and you can look online for different aprons from different degrees from back then, and they're beautifully crafted. I think it's just so hard. They put so many people through Freemasonry nowadays. It's hard to get all the supplies and get all of the things to have all, an apron for every single degree. It's just not practical. So, and that's why it would be cool if there were more people who were to join this fraternity, because it's going to allow for expansion, and then there would be more room and more place for things like that. But there are still very beautiful aprons made even today. And I might just go ahead and show you this. This will be a real treat. I have just a normal white lambskin apron, which is from my first 3 degrees. And then, sorry, hold on just a second. Oh, her car's fixed? Okay. Sorry, I just did a video. Are you taking it home? right, sorry about that. So I was actually having my fiance, her dad was fixing her car for her. He wanted me to tell me that it was done. So I have a white apron from my first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, and then this is actually an apron I got for being a past master of my lodge, because I was worshipful master of my lodge from roughly 2018 to 2020, right in that time frame. So this is a really beautiful apron. So yes, there are still intricate aprons around and beautiful ones, but usually more for like special occasions, or for people who are like Grand Lodge officers and such, and then for past masters, people who have been a master of a lodge before. Okay. So there's a Lodge of Perfection. There's 11 ineffable degrees according to this. Most of these notes are coming from this Franken manuscript over here, the book that I just showed you. 4th through 14th degree. In a lot of these degrees, each degree will have at least one sacred, there's different sacred names of God. And we've covered this before a lot with ceremonial magic. One of the sacred names of God, we're not going to go into very many of those, but just know there's different names of God which represent different aspects of God. And one of the most well-known ones is the Tetragrammaton, which is actually used in the ritual of the pentagram, the lesser ritual of the pentagram, whether that be invoking or banishing. Yod, He, Va, He is the Tetragrammaton. And these are each Hebrew letters. Now the first Yod, which is the letter, represents divine masculine archetype. The second, or the He, represents the divine feminine archetype or aspect. Va represents physical masculinity, and the last He, the second He, represents physical feminine. So you have divine masculine, divine feminine, the physical aspects of the masculine, and then the physical aspects of the feminine. So it's a fourfold name of God. And we've talked about that. If you want to go back in my lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram playlist and watch those videos, I go into detail about, different names, the different names of God, as well as like Adonai and stuff too. So that's where the connection really comes in between ceremonial magic and Freemasonry. The people who created the lesser ritual of the pentagram, they were Freemasons who like formed the Golden Dawn and all that stuff. So all of this is connected in many different ways. Utilizing these different sacred names of God. So the main theme of the 4th degree, or the secret master, is it's the original degree. The older versions that I like that I've read about. They talk about the articles of the Sanctum Sanctorum, which, as you know, the Holy of Holies, the Sanctum Sanctorum, is the place which was in King Solomon's temple, as well as the tabernacle in the wilderness with Moses, and the priests would go in there, and that's where they would communicate with, Yahweh. So they say. A lot of degrees have key numbers. This one uses the number 7 quite a lot, the older version of this degree. The blazing star is a symbol of Freemasonry that is talked about over time and time again. And it's obviously the pentagram, and it's even depicted oftentimes as blue. And when you do the lesser ritual of the pentagram, what color do you imagine the star as? It's a blue blazing star. It's the same star they talk about in Freemasonry, which represents divine providence and many other things. And the Albert Pike videos that I've done talk about the connection that it has with Horus. So Adonai, of course, is one of these sacred names of God, usually when you're facing the south, typically in ceremonial magic. But as I've talked about in recent videos, I've changed the direction that I do the elements in. So now I actually do fire in the east instead of air in the east. So I will vibrate Adonai in the east when I am doing invoking with Archangel Michael. in the east rather than being in the south. Elohim are also referred to, and as you know, in the Hebrew translations of the Bible, in the very beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The word there is Elohim in the original translation, but Elohim is feminine plural. We've talked about this before too, and Jordan Maxwell has a really good video on this. You should check him out if you do not know who he is. It's feminine plural, so it's multiple. That's talking about gods, or technically goddesses. So I think that's really important to understand too. Now, Universal Mastery, his YouTube channel, I've been recommending him a lot. He has great information. Has a video about Elohim and how they are actually a extraterrestrial race, which has been working at least since the time of John Dee and Edward Kelly, who were two ceremonial occultists, magicians, working with them to bring about changes for the human race. Go ahead and check out Universal Mastery's video on the Elohim, because I'm not going to get too deep into that right now. We're going to keep moving forward. There's possible connections with aliens, so that's interesting. And we also know about the sign of silence in ceremonial magic. When you're performing the LBRP or such, you usually do this. In the fourth degree, in the original fourth degree, there is a variant of this. And I see it's this constant connection between Freemasonry and ceremonial magic. That's why I'm writing a book on it. It's kind of my magnum opus. It's like the only real... I wrote a fiction novel when I was younger, never got published. I really love the story, though. I think it's cool. I wish they would make a movie out of it or something one day. So if that's something that you want to read at some point, I really need to get that copyrighted. I really only send that to like close friends and people that I already know. But I could definitely read some parts of that or talk about that at some point if you want. Dark Matter is the name of my story. But this book, this is going to be my magnum opus. I like to do YouTube videos a lot more than I like to write. I'm actually, I have to be in just the right mood to sit down and write, and I have to be in like a really calm, kind of quiet space and have music playing, usually like some classical music or study music. But I do like to do it every now and again. And I have a lot of things I want to say, and I want to put them in a book at some point rather than just having a YouTube channel. So people can have a book of mine, a physical book, that has a lot of valuable information in it and occult lore. And I kind of want it to be like my own masterpiece, like Albert Pike, had his Morals and Dogma, like Freemasonry and Ceremonial Magic, I think is the title that I'm probably going to go with for this book. I've thought of a few other titles, but that's pretty much where I'm at now, is Freemasonry and Ceremonial Magic. Or Ceremonial High Magic. I can't remember which title I ended up changing it to or going with. The Ouroboros is often mentioned. The circle is just a prevalent symbol anyway. It represents eternity, the wheel of karma, all of these things. The dot in the center, is the astrological symbol for the sun. And each of us is the dot, or we are the center of each of our own universes. Not in like a super egoic way, but also, yes, in an important, not in an egoic way, but in a way that we all realize that we are the divine. We are that source. That source is us as well. It's not something outside of ourselves. Like everyone wants to think there's a savior or something that's going to come fix it all for you. But this is all the experience you're meant to have. Because how can you come to the wisdom of God? We talked earlier about experience being essential. You have to have experience. You can't just read books and just be all philosophically smart. It takes both. It takes experience and knowledge. And a lot of people, they don't do either. They don't like sit and have the patience and the discipline to learn, or even like meditate and silence their mind and go within. But you also need to go out there and have real life experiences as well. So life isn't, it's not just about partying and always being entertained, folks. Yes, fun. Life is meant to be fun, but we are also, there's work to do and there's discipline to be had so we can better ourselves and we can better radiate that out into the world. This was an interesting point. Thanks to God. is said to be the first words ever spoken by man. So Adam must have said thanks to God. Interesting. And as you all know, there's interesting lore, talking about Archangel Raziel and Adam and Eve in the garden. He helped give them the knowledge to find their way back to grace. But as we all know, the fall was part of the plan all along. I would rather call it the awakening rather than the fall. So we were meant to go through this stuff. Like, it wasn't like that they made the mistake and they messed up. Like, no, like that was part of the plan the whole time. It's like we are all just different puppets of God, like, or conduits of God, helping the story unfold. So there's a meaning to all this stuff. Even when something bad happens in life, or if you make mistakes, there's a reason to all of this. There's real reasons for all of this. They talk about the Ark of the Covenant in this degree. Of course, they're talking about all the different furniture in the Sanctum Sanctorum. And star. So the Ark of the Covenant and star are symbols of God's alliance. Is made of shittim or acacia wood. I believe those are synonymous terms. God's anger appeased by the ark's covering. I thought that was an interesting one. So there's a name for the cover which goes on top of the Ark of the Covenant, and it's meant to appease God's anger, to calm him, to keep it confined in this box, this little box contraption thing. Very interesting, because we hear about the God of the Old Testament being wrathful and vengeful, and really, I'm going to go back to Universal Mastery. He has a video on Yahweh. It was Yahweh Truly Evil. You should go and check out that video. Super interesting video about how Yahweh is not actually even an entity like a god as we would normally think of it. It's a collective consciousness. It is a universal mind that actually comes from a different planet. I think it's maybe within the star system, or it comes from a different star system. But it's a hive mind kind of collective conscious. There's egregore. There's different names for it, and that we've talked about Lucifer a lot on this channel as well. Lucifer is actually a more primordial entity. A lot of these newer, like Yahweh and stuff like this, and Jesus, a lot of people say are modern egregores, or basically thought forms which have developed in more recent times that are more man-made. Whereas like Lucifer is a much more primal entity, which is one of the first beings to come out of the primal chaos, the Dark Mother, which gave birth to everything in existence. Divinity resided there in a peculiar manner and delivered his oracles within the Sanctum Sanctorum. There's a book called Liber 420, and he has a really interesting theory about how the priests used to burn certain plants or do certain entheogens, different substances, to gain these different heightened states of consciousness to communicate with the God, Yahweh. Some say that even cannabis, he says in that book that his theory is that cannabis was burned in this room, and he would ingest, the priest, whether it be Aaron or Moses or whoever, would ingest these fumes. Same with the burning bush, I've heard that. A lot of people think that Moses was having an experience with dimethyltryptamine. So these are all different theories to take into account. I'm not going to claim to know the answer because I wasn't there. So I really just like studying different people's theories and what they have to say. But a lot of it's based on research. They're going back and reviewing older texts, seeing what different authors and people have to say based on their research. So there's always cited sources. They're citing their work, so there's validity to it, And I still don't know if I'm saying this guy's name right. The Adoniram had the inspection and management of the laborers and workmanship at Mount Libanus after Hiram's death. He was the first of 7 secret masters to represent him, so that's why this degree is called Secret Master. The morning star is mentioned in some versions of this degree, and as we know, the morning star, Venus, Lucifer, it's all connected. And I will read the quote from that here in just a little bit. The lights were used in the older degrees in such a way that these bright lights and props, representing, divinity or source or whatever, or Kether, if you want to see it that way, used to add more effect to these rituals, to make a more impressive, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess just more dramatic effect, or impression the consciousness of the person who's going through the degrees. That's really what these degrees are for, is to make an impression upon the subconscious mind so that it brings about character change and development within the individual. They're becoming a higher version of themselves. The current of some of these degrees confers rank among the Levites even. So as you go through these degrees, this is a current. We've talked about currents of magic before. All of these, going through Adam, the first man, and going through Moses, Abraham. I'm not saying them in order, of course, but David, Solomon, Jesus, this whole lineage or this whole line, it's a magical current, that goes even back further to ancient Samaria. And some of these degrees have the ability to symbolically rank you among, like the ranks of the Levites and stuff. Very interesting. This degree deals a lot with death and grieving. I know there's a lot of like teardrops used, I believe, in like the furniture of we're talking about the older degrees, versions of this degree. Because the builder, has died. This takes place after the third degree, but not much longer after, I don't think. Not that much longer after. The key has a lot of symbology in this degree. The secret master has a key as one of its emblems. And as we all know, what do keys do? They unlock doors. They unlock opportunities. They unlock new states of being, new ways of thinking, new ways of perceiving. So